Ladies and gentlemen, the final session for the WIEF Roundtable 2021 is on urban farming and Agritech feeding the nation. Now, let me introduce you our moderator. She is one of Thailand's leading news presenter and masters of ceremonies, having hosted many high-profile regional and international events. She is also a lecturer in communications and public speaking with over 25 years of experience teaching at tertiary level. She hails from Thailand, but is currently based in Doha, Qatar, from where she continues to host her radio and television programs. Without further ado, allow me to welcome you, our moderator for this session, Ms. Pachari Raksawan. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Aslan, for that introduction to the final session for today. Now, it's always a challenge to be tasked with moderating a discussion when it's the very last topic of a conference. But I urge all of you participants, members of the audience, to stay with us because we are about to delve into a topic that I assure you is very interesting, intriguing for all. We will be offering you a glimpse into the excitement of investing in something innovative, which will not only see benefits and high returns in terms of business, but you will also be doing your part, contributing to a more sustainable future and contributing to ending hunger. Now, according to the information from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the number of people in the world affected by hunger increased in 2020. Between 720 and 810 million people face hunger. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very alarming indeed. The number of undernourished people in the world is also increasing. And yes, COVID-19 is partly to blame, but let this be a catalyst for change. Let this be a catalyst for us to take bolder actions to address food insecurity, malnutrition, and hunger. Now, as the title of this session suggests, we are going to turn to urban farming and agri-tech to feed the nation. We'll be finding out more about urban farming and its benefits from our three guest speakers. And I would like to now warmly welcome our speakers. We have Mr. Matt van Leeuwen, who is Chief Innovation Officer of Sunway Group and Director of Sunway iLabs, a smart partnership between Sunway University, Sunway Group, and Sunway Ventures to foster entrepreneurship, stimulate market-driven innovations, and accelerate scale-up. He is a council member of the Malaysian Business Angel Network, that's MBAN, the trade association and governing body for angel investors in Malaysia. A warm welcome to you, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us. I believe you're there in Malaysia.
Yes, I am. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you for being with us. Next, we have Mr. Mark Horler. He is the founder and chairman of UK Urban Agri-Tech Collective, bringing together leading companies, universities, and individuals in the urban agri-tech industry of the United Kingdom. He is also communications manager at the Farm Tech Society and co-founder of the Soya Project. Now, Mark's primary interest is in taking a systemic overview of how vertical farming can be integrated with other systems to deliver on its promise of regenerative food production and resilient societies. Hello to you. It's good morning over there. You're joining us from the UK.
Yes, good morning from a decidedly cold, dark and wintry Glasgow.
Oh, okay. Sending sunshine your way, Mark.
Thank you
for joining us. And last but definitely not least, we have Miss Eri Hayashi. Now, she is the Vice President of the Japan Plant Factory Association, which is a non-profit organization devoted to academic and business advancements in plant factory controlled environment agriculture. Before joining JPFA, Eri worked at a private research institute in Tokyo, specializing in technology advancement for global food production. Lovely to have you here with us, Eri. Now, thank you so much to all the speakers. We're very excited to have you here with us to share your experience and your expertise. To the audience, we welcome your questions. Leave them in the Q&A and we will be taking as many questions as we can. We're saving the last 20 to 30 minutes of the session to focus on your questions and your comments. And let's get things started right here. We're going to begin with an overview of what exactly is urban farming. What is agri-tech? Mark, you're going to give us a bird's eye view of what it is. Put it to perspective for us, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just share my screen one moment so you can see what I can see, hopefully. Can you see that okay?
We see it clearly.
Marvelous. So yeah, I'm just going to take you on a very quick bird's eye view whip through of what urban agritech is. So I'll start here with this view. As you can see from this, hopefully, it's a pretty broad church, to be honest. I mean, urban agritech can include all of these different technologies and some that I haven't got pictured here, whether it's kind of vertical farming or whether it's rooftop greenhouse, underground, larger scale greenhouses. There's mushrooms there, there's towers. There's an awful lot of different ways, and you could also include things like alternative proteins and algae and insects and who knows what else. So one of the things that you have to do when you sort of start to think about this, and what we did as an industry association, is to think very carefully about what the scope of it is and how you distinguish urban agritech from as a sort of subset of the broader urban farming picture. And what we came up with to do that was this, essentially, which is any use of technology to grow an edible or otherwise consumable product in an urban or peri-urban environment. And that allows you to take in all of these different things. And I think, you know, that's what we're here to talk about today, obviously, and we'll get into the weeds of that in due course. But I think it's very important that you have that peri-urban as well. Mm-hmm. Whether it's kind of brownfield sites or whether it's industrial parks or whether it's really hyper-urban and local. And there's a lot of different reasons that folks may get into this and a lot of different purposes. And so that leads me really to the question of integration, because what we're trying to do here, you know, I'm very keen to say this early on, that urban agritech is not going to, you know, it's not going to feed the world or replace traditional agriculture or any of these things. It is supplementary to them rather than instead of. And so what we have to really look at is the integration of all these different types and kinds of urban agritech and urban farming, and then rural farming and greenhouses and whatever else, and look at what's the best combination of those in order to drive forward the agenda that we decide. And what that really comes down to when you get down to it, and this is really what I want my takeaway to be from this just very brief introduction, is a question of systemic purpose. Mm-hmm. The question that any business or any government or whoever in this space should be asking themselves is, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? You have to start from that because everything else follows. So is it that you're trying to get, you know, to decarbonize? Is it that it's more about kind of local food, or is it a healthy food thing, or both? Come to that. You know, is it about resilience and reducing the length of supply chains? Is it an education thing? If it's an education thing, is it a schools thing, or is it a workforce and training thing, a vocational training thing? You know, and I say, is it a health thing? You talked just a moment ago about, you know, people being undernourished, overnourished. They're the wrong type of nourishment, if you like, or lack of the right nutrients.
Right.
These are big issues. And so the question is, if I just skip back one briefly, when you look at all of these, how can you utilize any given one or set or combination of these to drive these systemic purposes? And what urban agritech, and I think more broadly urban farming, but certainly urban agritech, are trying to do is to fit into this picture and to figure out how their particular piece of the puzzle fits into that wider puzzle, and how that can be of benefit in terms of sort of sustainability in all senses, financial, environmental, and social, you know, as part of a wider sort of resilient and more sustainable society, right? Mm-hmm. You know, that's a very brief overview, and I'm keen to let others speak, so I'll wrap it up there for now. But hopefully that gives you some sense of the purpose and what it's all about.
Thank you. Very clear. And you've just highlighted that this is actually supplementary to traditional agriculture, rather, and that you've got to sort of find a way to integrate it. So this is extremely key. Thank you very much. Now, let's go over, and you mentioned this, some of the benefits of urban farming. So, Eric, could you perhaps expand on this, a general picture of the benefits?
Sure. So probably going more specific to control environment, agriculture or plant factory or indoor vertical farming inside the building using technology. So one of the feature of that is that you are under the closed setting so that you can visualize what's going on, the interaction of plants and the environment. And since it's closed environment, data is less noise, cleaner data, so that you can visualize how much input and how much output and even how much waste you created. So everything is like the more you grow plants, meaning that the more you create in the data, so that you can, with a smartphone or internet, like online, you can visualize or estimate everything to calculate what's going on. So that's a simple way. So with that, in the future, we see that with a smartphone or wherever you are, it's about the distributed farming. So that no matter what size you are, maybe you are like a home learner or in a restaurant or a commercial producer, the large scale factory, everything is connected with the data. Mm-hmm. So that, it's a different word, but I mean, it's more like, you can be growing plants, but like it can be like a learning tool, or so you can, it's a more like empowerment of your life with, not just you are buying the plant or vegetable, but it's like a tool to empower your lifestyle. So.
Interesting concept there. Thank you. Matt, perhaps you wanted to add to that. So why should we be embracing urban farming and Agritech?
I think in general, I think what's urban farming brings to the table that the traditional farmings cannot do is that it's a lot more sustainable. And I think in this day and age, right, where we talk about climate change and all its impacts, I think we cannot ignore sustainability, right? And so, I mean, from our perspective here in Sunway, we are very much subscribed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we see food security and safety as a very important part. And of course, I think when you look at urban farming, I mean, what you can really achieve is to cut out a large part of the logistics and supply chain. Supply chains, of course, contribute a lot to the carbon emissions. But at the same time, we also see, I think on average, about 40% of the food being wasted, right? From when we bring from farm to table. And when you bring urban farms into the city, closer to where people live, you can actually contribute a lot of positive impacts when it comes to the environment. So that's what I would add to that as another benefit.
Excellent. And I'm happy you brought that up, really, because we need to focus more on sustainability and mitigating climate change. So really appreciate you bringing that up. Let's now get an overview of the current status of urban farming and Agritech, perhaps regionally, globally. Eric, perhaps you wanted to start?
Sure. I guess we can simply say that it's happening everywhere, I think. Probably just a matter of the difference of timing, but we can see that any regions or even the researcher or company or even the government people or investors, I think we are all together to like Matt said, for the sustainable future that we have to achieve. And for example, just let me give you an example of the stages of Japan. Since I'm from Japan, and the commercial plant factory indoor vertical farm, roughly speaking, there are 200 farms so far, including the small one. And then there are, I think, industry in the world is developing. And then indeed, there are actually commercial large-scale plant factory that are already profitable, running profitable, operation. So I think, it's very exciting era in the world. Just help of the artificial intelligence, integrate automation, robotics, and I think it's the transition. It's a really exciting stage. I think it's the same as UK, Mark.
Yes, and see, he's just invited you to speak now, Mark. Tell us about the current status of urban farming over there in the UK.
Yeah, I think it is taking off very fast in the UK. It was an interesting thing. I guess when the industry started, it was necessity was the mother of invention, right? So the places where it took off first were the places where there was a very clear case. So Japan was very early in, places like Singapore that lacked available land. And Firstly, at the other end of the scale, places like the US, where they've got loads and loads of land, but they were shipping green vegetables from California to New York, you know, and it's slightly bonkers. So it's, in the UK, it took a while to get going because, you know, the UK is broadly a fairly sort of green and pleasant land and fairly easy to grow in. But I think, you know, with pandemic, with climate change, with decarbonisation, with all of these things, you're now seeing it drive forward very quickly because there's a recognition in the UK and everywhere really that we can't carry on as we are. And that's really, and everybody in every industry is going to have to look fundamentally and ask themselves really fundamental questions about how to make what they do sustainable. And food is, you know, it's got to be top of that tree, right? It has to be. So I think it is going to expand everywhere. I think the other thing that's worth saying is that I kind of liken it to the way a plant grows almost, I suppose, that you had this sort of very rapid growth, the shoot, if you like, at the beginning. And now I would say it's beginning to mature and leaf out a bit, you know, and sort of consolidate a little.
Okay.
And, you know, in the coming years, when that's going to happen, it will then grow again and it will keep doing that, you know, in much the same way that a lot of things do naturally. So I think there is an enormous amount of potential, both in the UK and globally, for this to really expand and to reach a kind of maturity industry.
Oh, Matt, what's the situation over there in Malaysia? Let's get a country perspective from sort of like regional Japan perspective to the UK. Matt, over to you.
Well, so interestingly, I'm not Malaysian, as you probably would have noticed on my name and everything else. So I came to Malaysia 12 years ago and originally from the Netherlands. But one of the things what I noticed when I came to Malaysia is that people absolutely love food, right? And they love talking about it. And, you know, like from early morning until afternoon to evening, people always greet you by, have you had food, right?
We
Even
here in Thailand as well. We like snacking all day.
Right. Probably exactly the same in Thailand. Yeah. So just now I left my office. I think it's 3 p.m. here now, or 3 plus already. And the people ask me, have you had lunch already? It's like
late lunch.
It's 3. So you know, the food I think is a very important part in culture here in Malaysia. And I see definitely the urban farming and Agritech has definitely become a lot more important during the pandemic. Right? When people talked about disrupted supply chains and food security, you know, I don't think it's ever been talked about as much. But I think when it comes to policies, right, the government has a much bigger role to play, and I can definitely steer a country into a particular direction, right, and can really make or break a new industry and how it contributes to the GDP. So just an example, in the Netherlands, when I grew up, or actually when I was in my university days, the government came out with this mantra where they said like twice as much food using half as much resources. Mm-hmm. And this was at the beginning of this millennium. And now 20 years later, they are now the second largest exporter of agriculture products in the world with a value of about 100 billion euros per year. So, but it's important that, you know, when the policies are made or written down, that they will trickle down to the industry, right, to the people on the ground. And it's important that when they draft up these policies, that these different stakeholders are involved as well. Because oftentimes we see very well written policies, but they're written in isolation or by someone who is a civil servant and doesn't necessarily know what the current status is on the ground. And as a result, the implementation is lacking behind, right? And we've seen that here in Malaysia happening as well. But I think there's an opportunity now to come up with new policies. And Malaysia just came out with its new, what they called National Agri-Foods Policy 2.0. I think there's a Malay term for it. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's what it means. And I think they've taken it into account what I believe, some really important aspects, right, to drive this new industry. So one of them is that there's more focus on modern farming, on technology. And a lot of that would come from universities, like Netherlands, for example. You know, the food clusters all came around the University of Wageningen, which is in the eastern part of the country. And a lot of startups, a lot of industry started to be based there because they could take the IP and the knowledge from these universities and bring that to the market. And so we see now more attention here in Malaysia also being paid to how do we engage with researchers? How do we engage with students, right? Because at the end of the day, we can talk as much as we want about buzzwords like AI or Industry 4.0. If you don't have the talent to back it up and to drive these industries, it's really hard to bolster and to build up the industry. And it's really encouraging that in the last policy that was announced last month, that a lot of these factors are being taken into account. Just to see how they are being implemented, that's the next thing.
Good to know. Thank you for sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, joining this very last session on urban farming, Agritech, feeding the nation, we do want to keep this session as active as possible. So please send in your questions. If you do have any questions, send them in. Use the Q&A box that's at the very bottom there on your Zoom screen here. And we will have plenty of time to ask our speakers the questions that come in. So questions, please. Now, let's turn to overall future developments, and perhaps if you can share what you see are the opportunities in this exciting field. So, Eri, maybe you start?
Sure. Well, I think one of the most beautiful thing about this sector is that, you know, towards sustainable development goal, there are so many technology or opportunities or way to achieve. But I think with this sector, I think we can contribute or solve for the different problem at the same time. So I think that's a key with this sector. And then I think, I mean, I hope to get back to Malaysia because I love Malaysia. I had a really beautiful experience. But my personal goal with this technology is that because we believe that, of course, I mean, we can achieve the niche market, or the fancy product. But I mean, fundamentally, we have to solve the poverty issues or food issues. That's really serious, a fundamental issue. So I believe that with this technology, that it can be a perfect tool so that for the opportunity for the kids, instead of collecting cans or a single mother with raising kids, it can be empowerment, opportunity using this tool. Like, you don't need to go connect it with, data, with the plant data. So you can, instead of, you don't need to be a professor, for example, if you have a tool like, small system to grow plants, and if it's connected, and then you can probably find, like a nice plant recipe, then you can share with everyone. And so, I mean, that's I think it's just, different, platforms to change, even like an economy, social system, I think. So that's why I'm very motivated in this sector. So, and then probably like Matt can, help with a microfinance or something, a different, investment and platform for other opportunities. So I'm very looking forward to this excitement.
Thank you. Anybody with questions for Eri, please send them in the Q&A. We welcome your questions. Let's go now to Mark. You want to tell us about the exciting opportunities, future development, and then we'll come over to you, Matt.
Sure. I guess I'd start by picking up the points that have been raised so far. So I think this policy thing is really interesting, and the kind of there's coupling that with what Eri was talking about. There's a really interesting thing around innovation, around how to strike the right balance between governmental support along the lines of the systemic purposes that I talked about earlier, and the sort of the agility of the private sector and its ability to do innovative things, and then to hook that up also with the kind of research institutes, universities, these kind of things. And it's how to utilize all of those different things together and how to strike the balance between them in a way that enables really interesting and quite like much more innovative and less iteration, if you like, really pushing the boundaries of what can be done. And then the other big one for me, and certainly here in the UK, but I think everywhere really, is this with Agritech, and especially with technologies like vertical farming, there is this question about energy, you know, and that food and energy are inextricably linked to one another. They are entirely interdependent. So addressing some of those questions around the high energy use of agritech and controlled environment agriculture, and how to utilize combinations of energy and food, and then also looping in things like logistics and water and all sorts of other things, but primarily those two, how you can really get to that sort of decarbonization agenda, and then from there launch it into a wider set of benefits in society. I think that's the thing that I see as the next big challenge for urban agritech.
Right, from Mark, now over to Matt. If you can reflect on this, please. Yes, thank you.
Sure, and by the way, Ari, you're more than welcome to visit us in Malaysia again. We're very happy to host you here. So yeah, from our perspective, you know, where we see the opportunity. So we are one of the largest conglomerates here in Malaysia, and we've been very much brick and mortar driven up to, I think, 5-6 years ago, when we started to look more into innovation, sustainable development, and we started to sort of make our first steps into farming. Mm-hmm. We didn't start it out using technology so much, but more into organic farming on a piece of land around one of our resorts in Ipoh, the northern parts in Malaysia. And, you know, we've really figured out that these farms were very good for sustainability and good practices, but it's very hard to scale it up, right? And to have any dent into the industry. And this is really where we started to look more closely into urban farming. And really, I think where the opportunity that we saw came from 3 sides. And one of them was what Ari highlighted earlier. So we actually saw a lot of interest from our own university students who started to tinker around with IoT systems, technologies to grow their own plants. Mm-hmm. But they were lacking a platform to further commercialize it or to start their own company around it. And the second thing was that we have a property arm, and then they wanted to reimagine space. How do they use space like rooftops, car parks, or spaces that we are currently not renting out, right? And I think the pandemic really helped to sort of to build up that narrative and really start thinking about how do we do this at scale. But we didn't scale this up from the get-go, but really we saw the opportunity in bringing small players together. So the main stakeholders are the students, the researchers, the startups, and you know, there was not really an incumbent player who could really carry the industry forward. And so we started out with an urban farm innovation hub. And again, for the Malaysian listeners here, we would welcome you to come and talk to us and really see where the opportunities are. But really from upstream production all the way to downstream cloud kitchens, right? That you see to bring food to the people. We see a lot of opportunities. I think at the end of the day, technology plays an extremely important role. But first and foremost, I always say to the entrepreneurs, really try to understand the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And build a solution that has a good, what we call a problem solution fit, right? I think that would be a good starting point.
Thank you. There you go. You have an invitation to chit chat to Matt. Should you really want to seriously invest in this, I'm thinking that he is the perfect person to go to. But talking about investments and opportunities, you know, I'm thinking agritech, urban farming. Does it have to be large scale? Does it involve so much money? You know, in actual fact, it doesn't, does it, Mark? You're going to tell us about the different types of urban farming. Let's do that. So everybody has a clearer picture that you can actually start small, and you can start really anywhere, half a building on top of the building, or Mark, you know better than I do. You bring up your slides.
You're absolutely right. I will just share my screen again briefly. Thank you very much. Yeah, so it was really just to give a brief idea, because it can be very difficult to even start to think about, you know, with so many different options available, where do you even get started? So something that, you know, numerous people across the industry have been working on for the last sort of few years, however long it is this sort of typology. And there are many more of these than I'm going to share with you today, but just a few of them to get you started thinking about it is, you know, let me just close this a second, is just around like for example, what's the integration? Are you purpose building at the start, or are you going to convert something that was previously something else, or are you going to retrofit it into an existing building, whether that's kind of, you know, rooftop or whatever, or whether it's inside of that building? So that's kind of your first point. Where are you going to fit this thing? And then how is it going to interact with any given building? How is it going to form part of that? Is it kind of the whole building, like you can see there with interior, or is it a rooftop greenhouse? Is it these don't get talked about enough. Underground farms have been a thing that have gone on in various places around the world, notably in London, here in the UK, and in Liverpool come to that. Or is it going to be something adjacent? You know, are you just going to stick it next to something else? Co-location is a really interesting thing, where there are sort of synergies between resource flows, heat, carbon dioxide, whatever it might be, right? So that's another thing that you can be thinking about if you're looking at how one of these businesses will work. And then, you know, the other key question, and I think this comes back to something that Eri was talking about earlier with the kind of the plant factories or whatever, is what's the exposure, right? So are we talking about something that's just kind of outdoors, like a kind of raised box on a rooftop, for example, or a facade or something like that? Or is it something that's enclosed but still sort of lets light through? So the greenhouse would be your classic example here. Or are we talking about something that is a fully closed, controlled environment with, you know, kind of LED lights and HVAC and all these different things? So I think, you know, just flicking back over them, you can sort of start to see a picture emerge of how you can use these different typologies to really assess, and there are loads more of these, but how you can use them to assess what you might do. And if you can couple that to the kind of the systemic purpose that we talked about earlier, and some of the things that Matt's been talking about, you know, finding the problem and designing something to fit that, then you can really start to move things along. And it doesn't have to be about scale. It's about what's the right fit in the right place, what works for that particular context. And that's really the key thing here, I think.
Great. That was very, very helpful. Thank you. Very clear. And let's go over to some of the questions that came in via the chat. Once again, if you could please post your questions in the Q&A and not the general chat box, please. So we'll align all the questions there. But just turning to the chat first, here's a question for you, Matt, and it's linked to what Mark just told us about. So there's a lot of talk in small group chats. There's a lot of excitement about sort of small scale farming. So persons with gardens sufficiently large to do small farming, etc., but they need guidance on whom to contact for guidance in terms of capital outlay and types of farming. So where do they go to sort of like really start things, take things seriously to the next level after sort of like, okay, I've got this plot of land, I'm interested.
Right, yeah, no, very interesting question. And I think definitely over the last like year and a half, again, because of the pandemic, we saw a lot more conversations happening around it, right? So a lot more panel sessions like this one happening around urban farming and how people can learn from each other. From our side, in our Sunway X Farms, as I said earlier, it's an urban farm innovation hub. We actually started to organize a lot more workshops and talks for people who are interested in urban farming. And, you know, the workshop is not necessarily about using technology, but it's also, we talk about sustainability, you know, building up something for your community. How do you help drive that? And I think maybe the whole notion of urban farming has to be technology driven, you know, may not be always the right sort of purpose here in Malaysia, because some people just want to get started for their neighbors, right? And I think with technology, I think the risk is that sometimes people make expensive purposes. They buy the technology, but then after a few months, they don't really know what to do with it anymore. And so I think it's important that, you know, like for these small gardeners or community gardens, if you want to start it, that you find a group of people, maybe people have done it, right, in their own communities, learn about their best practices, how they've done it, what are the challenges that they are facing, and get started. And I think what Mark said is quite right. It doesn't need to start at scale. You can start in a very small way, just for your own family, right? You can start to produce your own food, and then you can move to your neighbors. So definitely, I think connect to the right groups. I think there's more, Facebook groups online here in Malaysia now, and if not, you can always come and talk to me or to any of my colleagues.
Thank you, Matt. Let's now address this question, talking about some of the challenges that one may face. Coming from Sharma Adya, what are the barriers, if any, to the success of urban farming? While it may have positive impacts on the environment, are there any drawbacks at all? Anybody at all? Mark?
I'll have a crack at it. I mean, I think the big barriers are still the same ones they have ever been. So it's the capex to set up urban agritech facilities can be challenging, although obviously if you start smaller, and then the operational expenditures, so the energy, the labor, the workforce, all of that kind of stuff. These are broadly the two categories. And if you start large, then you're going to have a very large amount of capex, and that's going to create certain challenges in your business model. If you start with that much smaller model, you're not going to be able to do much in the way of sort of automation and things like that. So labor and energy and other sort of inefficiencies can begin to creep in, and that has issues for your kind of operational expenditure, right? So you're pushing the cost between the one and the other. What was the other? There was another part to the question. Remind me.
The other part, any drawbacks at all, or any impact on the environment?
Right, sure. So I think, this comes back around to this question about energy for me. I'm sure there are answers, but if you build a big sort of agritech facility, say, for example, and it draws quite a lot of power, and if you're getting your energy from the grid and that's coming from, say, coal or other fossil fuels, then that's not a great thing, right? That doesn't. So, again, that's a reason why this question of how to do it with renewables and how to decarbonize is really, really important, because although you can offer many, many benefits, if you're not getting good energy, then you're potentially undermining those benefits and having a fairly serious impact there.
Ari and Matt, did you want to further add to that? Maybe some drawbacks, any further impact? If not, that's fine too, because we've got plenty of questions coming in. Okay, here's a question. Is hydroponic farming popular in the countries where you are from? So is that popular in the UK? Is that popular? I don't know, maybe you can talk about back home in Holland as well. And of course, in Japan.
I can just say in Malaysia, it's still very much nascent industry. There are not that many players. It's becoming more popular now, definitely. In the Netherlands, I think they're much way ahead. I think, depending on what crops you're producing as well, right? But for a lot of the leafy greens, I think hydroponics is probably the dominant technique that's being used to produce these leafy greens. And I see it's growing in Malaysia, but it's still very nascent. Okay.
I think it's quite popular here in Thailand. I mean, you see a lot of it on market shelves, and I see people are turning to hydroponics as sort of like a hobby at home as well. What's the situation in Japan, Ari?
Sure, it's quite popular because if you talk about greenhouse, it's usually using a hydroponic system. And, in Japan, we in JPFA, we have 15 greenhouse and a plant factory or vertical farm system. That's what we received before pandemic. We received 5,000 people every year, and we received lots of people from Malaysia. It's interesting to see how the interest changed. Each year. And then, if you look back in the history, like usually if you are field farming and there's some sort of like steps, and then after that your plastic house, greenhouse and a greenhouse control environment, and then like indoor vertical farming thing. But now it's interesting to see even from like a jump or something from a field and suddenly in the indoor. So I think it's more like a diverse movement. So it doesn't matter where you are. So I think, we have a lot more choice, I think, than before. But then also I would like to add on that we have to have a good manager to integrate, because we are dealing of such a different, diverse technical aspect, because you have to know about agriculture, but not only that, we have to deal with engineering, and chemistry, or like a biotech, or even like a design, or if you are selling the food, you have to talk to the consumer. And then, so, it's all about like an integration of different aspects. So you have to talk the same language, even from the different backgrounds. So if we can, I think that's the most important things.
Okay. And Mark, in the UK, is hydroponics something that's popular over there?
Yeah, it really is. It's coming on pretty fast. I mean, in across all its different types as well. So, when you talk about hydroponics, you're also talking about large sort of rural or semi-rural greenhouses as well, which is a bit sort of off topic from where we are, I suppose, today. But, certainly in the urban environment, it seems to be, and peri-urban environment seems to be following two broad tracks, which I would call the sort of hyper-urban, hyper-local, small scale.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be like the small vertical farm supplying microgreens to restaurants, right? That's that kind of model. And then the other one is the kind of peri-urban, much larger scale, potentially fitting into kind of retail supply chains and replicating something more like what conventional agriculture does. It fits into that kind of hub and spokes logistical supply chain type issue. So they're very different approaches, but both of them are multiplying pretty quickly here in the UK. So I think definitely it is becoming much more popular and much more well known, and a much more substantial part of the wider mix of food systems here, definitely.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one's from Tawfiq Hussain from Bangladesh. Here's an interesting one. I'm very much interested regarding this field. What do you think of the prospect of urban farming in Bangladesh? Is there a training center which provides beneficial courses upon this? And is there any trusted organization assisting A to Z information, opportunities, links, solutions for this sector? Would anyone know? How does one get started in Bangladesh?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't know the answer to it.
But Mark, you could help, couldn't you?
Specifically, I mean, I'm more than happy to have a chat, because I got two hats. I have UK UAT, but I also work with an international association. So yeah, if there are people coming out from various countries, I'm happy to have a chat. And I'm also, I think, one of the things that's going to need to happen is for associations of the kind, of one kind or another that all three of us are involved in, they really help to support the emergence of industries, because rather than just being a few isolated players and each person having to reinvent the wheel as they go, you can learn from each other, and it's that networked distributed thing that Matt and Ari were talking about earlier of learning from each other, and therefore everybody benefits from that, and it grows faster that way. But there are resources online that people can find. There are sort of free online courses, charged online courses come to that as well. So it can be tricky to find your way around, but I think it is possible, and it would be great to see it begin to emerge, definitely.
Maybe just to add to that, I think probably the best way to get started is just to get started, but at a very small scale. And you probably don't get it right, but I think from the mistakes that you're making, you will learn a lot. And I think at the same time, what Mark said, there's so much information available online today. I attend conferences in the US, Europe on the same day sometimes, right, without having to travel there. And a lot that you can learn. Interestingly, from Bangladesh, we had some students 3 years ago that saw an opportunity to start a rooftop farms. And so they started out very small in Malaysia on some rooftops, and they were supplying to some of the restaurants here. And they then wanted to go back to their own country, right, to take what they've learned here, experience, and do that at scale in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. So I need to look up what the name of the company is and whether they're still doing it, but we definitely heard stories like that.
There you go, Tawfiq Hussain. Thank you very much for your question. And feel free to contact Mark or Matt should you need further guidance. Let's go over now to this question from Abdul Latif, who's in Brussels, startup founder of World Technology Center. Most of the urban farmers or suppliers failed to provide the agricultural supplies due to certification issues as required in the USA and EU markets. So who's responsible in addressing this issue? Would anybody be able to help responding to Mr. Abdul Latif here? Mark, you always save the day.
I say a willingness to jump in, even though I don't necessarily know the answer. I think, yeah, I mean, certification is an enormous question. And I think there's a lot of urban agritech in particular is quite new. Certification is not necessarily a thing that is established in these industries just yet. You know, perhaps Eri can correct me here, because Japan, it's been going a lot longer. And there are the emergence of some of these. There's the Food Safety Coalition in the northeast of the US as well, you know, and a few others dotted about that are looking at these questions, and industry associations are looking at them, obviously. But it does take time to develop sort of certification and standards and labeling and all of these kinds of things. So I think the key to it, and it depends entirely on the local context, I suppose, but try to find what the baselines are where you are. Who are you selling to? If you're going to sell into supermarkets, you're going to have a lot more hoops to jump through than if you're selling at a local sort of street market or something like that, right? So it's finding out what your local context is, where the baselines are, and then, you know, beginning to, well, meeting whatever standards are there. And then, you know, as an industry develops, you can begin to meet wider sort of certification requirements in whatever given region you're in.
Thank you. Matt, this question is for you. It's what needs to be done to boost urban farming in Malaysia? And are the current policies in place adequate in supporting urban farming?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. So be careful what I say then. But no, I think, you know, in Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, and I think there's a good improvement with a new policy that just came out, the National Agro-Food Policy. I think a lot has been mentioned about modern farming, using technologies, talent development. I want to know a little bit more of how this is panning out and what sort of incentives are being put in place. I think when it comes to indoor farming, for example, right, that is very capex intensive, that you need to think also about the financing of that, right? And in Malaysia, we do have a national bank, an agro bank, that's has been financing the agriculture industry. But I think that products are also need to be refined for this urban farming industry, where you need more funding upfront, right, before you actually can start producing and you see a return on investment compared to the traditional farming techniques. And so concurrently, we can't just rely on the traditional loans, right, as the financing instruments. We need to think much broader into, like, how do we develop the venture capital and the risk capital industry? And I think in Malaysia, since last year, there have been new VC funds, new incentives under the Ministry of Finance that have been started, and we see Agritech as one of the verticals that has been highlighted, right, and that are currently now being funded. In our own ecosystem in Sunway, we have an accelerator program as well as a VC fund. Both initiatives, we have agro and food as one of the verticals that we focus on and that we started to invest in. Not just urban farming production, but we even look into alternative proteins. Companies and startups in that space. So we're very much looking at it more holistically. But capital is required, but as I said earlier, it can't be stressed enough that we need to think more about talent development, right? And how we build up entrepreneurs, talent who don't just understand the agricultural principles or biological principles, but also know how to work with technology. They also know how to build a successful business and how to raise funding. So it's not just a task of the government, it's a task of education institution as well as private investors all coming together to make it successful. And I think Malaysia, we still, as I said earlier, we're still very much nascent when it comes to urban farming, but I see there's a huge opportunity for us to do something very meaningful.
Thank you for your response there, Matt. Mr. Taufiq Hussaini has just said that if anybody is interested in investing in Bangladesh, a warm welcome. Labor cost is cheap there, and the government is very much welcoming towards foreign investment. So do the networking, everybody. This is your golden opportunity as well. Now, this question came in from the Malaysian Reserve. We've got to respond to this. Can modernized agriculture help to combat rapid inflation of food costs? Ooh.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, we've seen this happening over the last few weeks, really, right? I think food inflation is a very, very tough problem to solve. And I don't think there is a panacea to the problem. Let us say, this is it, try it, and then they will solve it. But I think in Malaysia, I think a lot of the inflation actually came, if I got it right as well, but it came to the increased prices of pesticides and fertilizers that have been imported from other countries. And so because a lot of the traditional farms still rely on these chemicals, right, to grow their crops, they are passing on that increased cost from their raw materials to the consumers, right? And therefore we have seen quite a rapid increase in pricing, which is very worrying, to be honest. And I think the government is stepping in to give some more subsidies to these farmers who are mostly smallholder farmers, right? And these guys are living below the national income levels, right? Sometimes, and so they need more support. But it's a tough problem. I think at the end of the day, if these fertilizers, these chemicals increase in prices, we have to start thinking about alternatives, right? Natural alternatives to start with, especially when we think about sustainability, and start producing it in our own country rather than relying on importing it from other countries. So that's just my opinion. But again, it's a much hairier and very tough problem, and very, very difficult to crack.
Does anybody else want to respond to that question?
Yeah.
Please, Eri.
Yeah, so I think, depending on the methodology, or speaking of the closed environment, I think, as Mark mentioned, that right now it's a slightly higher cost to produce compared to the field ground, but there also at the same time it's advantage because you can achieve the consistent supply, because no matter what weather is or climate change, you can keep producing at the same level, constantly, even like a same price. So you can, promise the same price, or the volume or the quality. And it's a consistent, uniform, production. And also if you compare with a field grown vegetable and then the indoor setting grown, if you compare a post-harvest process, and you don't need to clean, or you don't need to wash, or you don't need to trim. So if you compare the waste volume, and then if you consider that as a cost-wise, and then it's almost the same price. So I think there's a different way. And then also the modernized and digitalized farming, it's easier for us to prove how clean or how good your product is, because you have a data, you can show with the data.
Yes, there is actually a concern regarding cleaner, safer products and produce here. Al Chan is saying, is sent in a question on GMO-free crops. I think a bit frustrated here because organic products or GMO-free crops not widely discussed in Asia as compared to the West. So I think he just wants to push for safer produce. So we can see that more, no, with urban agri-tech and farming. Mark?
Yeah, if there's no reason that you couldn't do, sort of GMO-free crops in urban agritech systems or whatever. So if that's something that there's a consumer desire for, then yes, that is a thing you can do. I think, yeah, I mean, it is that conversation, isn't it? It's of how technologies can allow you to make choices, right? That it's about how, when you grow in a field, the largest determinant of what you grow is whether it will grow well, so it's whether it's, resistant to pests or weather damage or whatever else it might be. When you move into these technological systems, and when you look at the integrations of technological and less technological systems and, outdoor and indoor and whatever else, you can begin again to have these kind of conversations. What are we trying to achieve here? What is it we want as the outcome of this? And then you can utilize all the different pieces that you have to meet those differing needs and requirements from consumers, from the market, from government, from whoever else, right? It's those questions of purpose. What are you trying to do? And having that conversation. And this ties back to the previous question as well for me, in that, if you're, that question of like, what is it that you're trying to do? And therefore everything else kind of follows from that, I suppose.
Just to add on to that, on that notion on like that there's not enough conversations happening. I think it's to do also with awareness, right? I mean, I think the technology is there, and to grow things completely pesticide free, I mean, we can do it, but a lot of people don't know about the benefits enough, right? About like what's the difference between organic or vertically farm grown or traditional farm produce, and I think that needs to happen a lot more. I think that would be a good starting point. But at the end of the day, I think people talk maybe a lot more about food security, right? And then the conversation ends up more about how do we increase production, right? But at the end of the day, it's not about like eating more rice, right? For example, but you also have to think about the nutritional value, the safety of the thing, and I think that there can be a lot more emphasis on that, on especially the nutritional value of the food that we eat in this part of the world. Yeah.
Very true. Now we're running out of time here, but we cannot touch on funding. It's got to be very brief. We have a link that's been sent in. Indonesia, the youths are leading the way in Agritech and talking about impactful startups. So let's quickly go into funding for startups. How do we go about it? Very quickly. Matt?
Yeah, what's the question? Sorry, availability of funding, or what's the question? Sorry.
Basically funding for startups. How do you go about?
How do you go about it? Okay. I think when you look at the urban farming and agri-tech in the Western world, US, Europe, Japan, probably, I think 5-10 years ago, I think a lot of money started to flow into it. I think we see ourselves these deals, the startups maturing, deals become larger, right? We even see companies getting listed, right? I think this year I probably saw 6 or 7 urban farm companies in the US getting listed through a SPAC, right? A special purpose acquisition company. And now how these companies are growing after they are listed and whether they can actually justify the valuations, because some of the valuations are more than $1 billion now. That's to be seen. In this part of the world, we definitely see an increase in capital coming in, the early stage, seeds, Series A, Series B venture capital. I think there's sufficient funding for entrepreneurs to tap into. I think the gap in Southeast Asia is the Series C funding, but anything after that, pre-IPO, there's enough money in the ecosystem to fund the companies. But at the end of the day, what I always say to the startups or the early stage entrepreneurs, don't just come with a pitch deck, really show and demonstrate that you have something, that is, you have done your homework, you know what markets that you are addressing, you know the problem you're solving, and more importantly, do you have some early data to show that the customers are willing to buy your solution? If you have these things, then there's a good chance you can get some early stage funding, at least here in this part of the world. And I'm talking about Southeast Asia in general, but we're still very much earlier than in the Western world when it comes to the companies that we are seeing to grow up.
Mark, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think I agree with all of that, but I would also add that there's certainly here in the UK, and I guess it may be the case elsewhere, that there's kind of there may be some degree of public funding around government incentives, and there may be sort of innovation bodies. So like here in the UK, we have kind of UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, and Innovate UK sits under them. And they fund interesting things, and you can build these sort of consortia with universities and startups and, you know, some funding, and that can really help to even out the flow in those early days when money can be quite hard to get to. And just to echo Matt's point as well, that going from startup to scale up is definitely missing right now to some extent. There is definitely a need for more support in that area as well.
Okay, Eri, I'm going to give you the final words, last chance to speak here. If you could just maybe, you know, push for the audience to embrace urban farming.
Great. Well, I mean, I guess we all need to appreciate at the same time about the history, that because there are so many research out there in the world, like there's history. So it's a really new industry, but I mean, it's already there. So I think we can search for existing technology and a partner like Mark or Matt said, like university or researcher, and then, you know, you don't need to start from scratch. I mean, you know, you can work with some others and then to work together to achieve the goal. So I think that's the key. Find a partner and good friends. And then I think everyone is a nice person in this sector. I see it. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Eri, to Mark, and to Matt for joining us. We've really run out of time. Thank you very much to all the participants for staying with us until the very end. That's going to wrap up this very last session on urban farming and agri-tech feeding the nation. I'm going to give the floor back to the MC. Aslan, back to you.
Thank you, Pachari, and to all our distinguished guests for being here today and making this session successful. I hope all of you have benefited from the session. On behalf of WIEF Foundation, thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe and take care. This is Azlan Kadir on behalf of WIEF Foundation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.